something about Sega felt like this was a video game brand that was so different from Nintendo. Nintendo was more of a facade, family-friendly thing, but they were really like, they had an extremely high standard.
Right.
Sega's thing was more cooler,
Yeah.
more edgier, and that's what made me fall in love with them. Angel Knot.
Hey, what's good? Salutations to the nations. What's up, Angel Knots? Yo, so today I have two special guests here with me. Okay. I have Sega Renaissance and Valentine, and we're just gonna be talking about all things Sega, you know what I'm saying? So let's go ahead and bring them in. How you all doing?
I'm perfectly well.
That's
Not
what's
bad. How you doing?
doing pretty good. Doing pretty good. Okay, so just to update, those of you all who don't know, Valentine and I, we had this conversation before, and he hopped on a live and he was bringing a lot of good stuff to the table. And I said, "Hey man, why don't you go ahead and get on the video?" He did, and we had a great conversation. And the audio was destroyed on my end. You heard like 13 of us talking at the same time. It was so many doubles. So I appreciate him hopping back on here and kind of just adding more to the conversation. And his friend Sega Renaissance, I just want to hear his perspective as well. And they know a lot more than I do about Sega. And I'm always willing to learn. So I do want to welcome them on. And if you guys kind of want to introduce yourselves a little bit and, let everybody know what got you into Sega, how long you've been into it.
Would you like to go first, Valentine?
All right. Hey, I'm Valentine, and my introduction to Sega was when I was a kid. It was about 1985, 1986, and Nintendo came out in '85. I saw that as a kid because I had a lot of consoles before that. I didn't start with Sega. I started with Atari, ColecoVision, and Television, Texas Instruments, TI-99, Stroke 4A. I had a few other, ones to go through. But when Nintendo came out, we didn't have enough money to buy a new Nintendo. So what happened was we had to wait a year. And during that time, in 1986, Sega released their Sega Master System. And for that Christmas, my parents were like, look, you can buy one or two. You can buy one or the other. You can't get two. So I had to end up going with what my brothers wanted. They wanted a Nintendo because that would mean that they could trade with the other kids on the block and everything. And, they were gonna do that since Nintendo had already been out for a year. So, I had to wait. And I waited and waited and waited until finally one year in 1991, I got a Sega Genesis Model 2. Or 91 or 93. I think it was 93. I got a Model 2. Model 2 Sega Genesis. And from then on, I was Sega all the way. After that, I was like, nope, there's not a console for me out there that is anything that can take the place of Sega. And it wasn't just because of the Sega Genesis and, the fact that it was that. I had played just before that, a neighbor lady, she was going to get rid of her Sega Master System. She let me play with it, and she asked me if it was worth anything. And I said, yeah, it's probably worth something. It's not as good as the Nintendo at that time, which it wasn't because the games, they didn't have the games, but it's not their fault. But I mean, we can get into that if you want to. But, to cut this story short, I got into Sega when I actually got hardware, but I had always been a Sega fan, and I stayed a Sega fan for the rest of my life, even after Dreamcast left. So that's me. I'm Valentine. I'm a big-time Sega hardware fan. I'm a big Sega hardware geek. I love all the hardware stuff. I'm real nerdy about it. That kind of stuff. Anyway, I'll pass it over to Sega Renaissance.
So just to be clear, and so your first console was the Sega Genesis. Your first Sega console, or was it the Master System?
My first Sega console that I owned was the Sega Genesis.
Okay, but your neighbor had a Master System and asked you about it.
Yeah, me and a couple of friends were playing out on the street, as you do, and she wanted to come up and ask one of the other kids, one of the teens or kids. We're kind of in between, so you could call us a tween. they asked us, does anybody want to come over and look at this video game system she was going to sell it. Nobody did, and for good reason, stranger danger kind of stuff, but not me, my stupid self. I decided to go with her. So I went with her and went into her house. She had a parrot. I remember that. She had this parrot. And I walked in there and she showed me the system. And that was my first time I ever got a chance to play Sega Master System. And from that very first moment I played the Sega Master System, I fell in love with Sega, even though it was like 93 and like 4 or 5 years past its time, its initial release. But I fell in love with it. And, I was like, man, if my parents don't get a Sega, man, for me for Christmas, I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm probably just not going to be in games anymore after this.
Wow.
But luckily, my parents got me a Sega Genesis Model 2 for Christmas that year. So that's where I'm at.
That's what's up, man. It was a whole different time back then when you could just go to a neighbor's house. I won't. Nowadays somebody wave at my kids. Like, yo, chill. No, but that's what's up. What about you, Renaissance?
My story begins in late 1985. I come from a military family. And I was 3 years old at the time, and my neighbor, for his birthday, he got the Nintendo brand new with the robot. And
Okay,
yeah. So I first got exposed to it then. My first system was the NES, but I didn't get it until my stepfather got it for me for my 5th birthday. It was the action set with Super Mario Brothers and Duck Hunt. Now, my Sega journey, I think, starts in '88 because my older neighbor had a Master System. And I were playing.
These neighbors introducing people.
It was the neighbors. I remember the biggest thing that I do remember is that I became way more recognized with Sega in the summer of 1991 when Sonic the Hedgehog first hit the scene. My stepdad's friend, my mother, her girlfriend's husband, he brought a Sega Genesis with the bundle in 1991. And he taught me how to play Sonic 1. Mm-hmm. And I remember playing that way more because it was the same year Super Nintendo was coming out. And I wanted that for Christmas. I asked my stepdad for that for Christmas. And I was getting tired of my old Nintendo. I was chafing. But when I played Sonic 1, there was just something about its presentation that drew me to the brand. And then soon after that, I got to play Streets of Rage. Something about Sega felt like this was a video game brand that was so different from Nintendo. Nintendo was more a facade, family-friendly thing, but they were really they had an extremely high standard. Right. Sega's thing was more cooler, more edgier, and that's what made me fall in love with it. So I got a Super NES and Christmas of '91 because at the time I felt like the Genesis didn't have enough games yet. But I set in my heart, once it did, I would ask to get one. So 2 years later, long story short, my neighbor gets Sonic 2, because there's the funny commercial parody. Like Sonic 2 removes that thing. So my neighbor got it, and he said, "Yeah, remember your pets will love it too." Sonic 2 with Sega Genesis. So I asked my mom to get me the Model 2 Genesis with Sonic 2 bundle because it came with the second controller as well, or you could go and get a 6-button controller at the time. So she got a stack. My stepfather got me and my older stepbrother a JVC1, or you'll learn about that later. It was a bundle that combined the Sega CD and the Genesis the same year and had prize fighter. So from that time on, from the advertisements they had, from one advertisement, I think it was called, I think that kind of Sega Genesis, where a kid gets Sega Genesis for Christmas, and all the kids want to come over and play. And the more that I read Game Pro, I felt like there's something in Sega. There's heart, there's soul, there's something good about this company. I like this video game company. So I had Sega Channel in '95 as well, and I love Sega Channel. I had Sega Channel in '95, and so when we get to '97, my family transfers out. Transfer around because we're in the military. He took me to 8-beat, my stepdad, and got me and my little brother a Sega Saturn. And by then, it was the price had fallen down. And he got a Mega Man 8, and he got me Sonic 3 Blast, and we later got Fighters Mega Mix. And I later got the bundle. It came with the Virtua Fighter 2 and the Daytona. The more that I played Sega, the more that I knew there's something about them that is good. It's just that they're not, they don't know how, that there's personal problems when it comes to running a company. When Dreamcast came out, I was hyped.
Okay, hold on. We going to
I know. I'm trying to get to the end. So
okay.
when Dreamcast came out, I was hyped. I got it November of '99. I bought it from Game Crazy. I missed them a lot, and I got Side Adventure from Bunkerland. Now, the last part about that is that after that, I got sick with cancer. So when I was in the hospital, I got my Dreamcast and I had it with me in my hospital bed, and I played it with me while I was in the hospital. I still have a special plastic briefcase it came in, and that's where I keep my Dreamcast stuff in. But the thing is, like I said, at the end, the put it at the end with this, I feel the same way. The Dreamcast to me was to be continued. It was a cliffhanger. No, this is not the end. There's more to this with Sega. It cannot be the end. It's because, as far as I'm concerned, Sega didn't go under like Atari and everyone else did. They're still here.
And that's very poetic because that was your story, while you were in the hospital. Like it's not the end, That's that's deep. That's very deep. It's crazy because now that I'm thinking about it, my neighbors had Sega as well. That's how I was introduced to Sega. Because my neighbor down the street, his name's Zach, rest in peace. He had a Sega Genesis, and we would come up. I would go over, and we would play like Sonic and Contra, and I remember his brother had Ringworm. that was a memory I'll never forget. But yeah, and then my neighbor across the street, they had Sega Channel, and then my house we had Nintendo, and then when my parents got divorced or whatever, my mom, she had a Sega Genesis over her house. But yeah, that's crazy how the neighbors, really helped everybody on to that. Okay, so Valentine, back to you. So what game or moment defined Sega for you growing up?
I gotta think about that one for a second.
Or Renaissance, do you know?
I would say, for me, for Nintendo, it was Mario 3 when that came out in '89. For me, it was Sonic CD. That game completely, it was Sonic at the peak of excellence, and it was Sonic at being, it was on Sega CD, and platforming the way that Sonic CD presented itself, PlayStation wise, had never been done like that. It was. I mean, it wasn't just the side; it was the game design. The level design was incredibly otherworldly for that time. I mean, it was very psychedelic and very techno, clubhouse rave. Those type of things weren't, especially in America. That wasn't something kind of it had like anime influence to it. Very psychedelic. So it's otherworldly design, level design, and its gameplay being even faster and even more fluid than Sonic 2 is what defines Sega to me. That this is a company that knows how to make video games that are not the standard, but they can do. They have the talent to really do something ubiquitous that no one else does.
And that game is 3D, right?
It's 2D, but you get like when you go to the special stage in Sonic CD, it's 3D. It's a little like Sonic 2, but it was like it's like early micro polygons.
Okay.
You see that.
Okay. Do you prefer 2D or 3D Sonic?
I'll be honest. I haven't played a new multi-platform third-party Sonic title since Sonic Riders. I would say that I'll just make it straight up. Sonic lost his identity when Sega left the consumer business in 2001. We'll get into that later, what happened.
Yeah.
But when what it is that when you put a Sonic game together, it has to be defined by what the hardware is for, and how they look. Because with the Genesis, the Sega Genesis was a fast machine. It had a fast CPU. The Motorola 68000 was a fast microcomputer. So Sonic represented the speed and the power of the Genesis.
Reflected,
Everything was fast. So with Sonic, with the 3D end of things, Adventure on the Dreamcast showed what you can do on the basic end of the hardware. Adventure 2 showed what you could really get with it, and showcased a lot of open world, which is a lot of that was new in the late 90s. Open world gaming.
Right.
Not even the PS1 had that. So with me, with Sonic games modernized, I would say that if you play them mostly on Steam and things of that nature, you might have an idea of what it may actually, its ingenuity might supposed to be. You can't get that when you play it on PlayStation or Xbox. You just don't really get that. So that's my opinion with Sonic's 3D titles. A lot of it is that after Dreamcast, so many of them that came in were not Sega fans. They didn't care or remember any of that.
Right.
So nowadays, you got them that play Sonic. They're so picky. They don't like this feature. They don't like that. And Sega's always tried to come up with something new. They're used to Mario being the same thing. They want Sonic to be exactly the same way. But
Right.
Sonic is. And Sega likes to try new ideas.
Yeah, they try to mix it up.
Yeah.
Sometimes to a fault. If in my opinion. Don't jump me, guys. Okay. So all right, Valentine, I give you plenty of time to think. What game or moment defined Sega for you growing up?
Okay, when I got my Sega Genesis, my Model 2, the two games that really defined that for me was Sonic 2 and Super Street Fighter 2. 2 Turbo, I believe it's called.
Choice.
Or 2? No, Super Street Fighter 2. Those two games really defined Genesis for me at that time. But of course, Contra Hardcore,
Oh my god.
a few other games like that really defined what that meant for me. Really what it just did was it really solidified in my mind that yeah, this is where I belong. I don't belong with Nintendo. I don't belong with anything else. I belong here with Sega. And then if we skip ahead a little bit to Sega Saturn, it was the Virtua Fighter 2. Virtua Fighter 2 also really took that home to me that, yeah, this is what Sega is. This is what they should be, because I was a big Sega arcade fan. I love Sega arcade games. And that's why it says Sega hardware fan under my name there, because I'm a big time Sega hardware fan. I love the arcade games. I love the home consoles, all that kind of stuff. And then, I wanted to get a handheld between Genesis and Saturn, but there really wasn't one. But I got the Sega Nomad, which was the portable Sega Genesis. So that all of that together was like a moment in time. If you want to capture a moment where that moment was the moment that solidified in my mind. Yeah, me wanting a Sega Master System back in '86 was, if I had the money, I would have gotten one, because I'm definitely a Sega fan.
Yeah, Contra Hardcore, that's like one of the best games of all time. I literally just bought the actual cartridge from somebody on Facebook Marketplace, like a state over, and like they're mailing it to me. Like I was able to get it for a way better deal than like eBay. eBay, that game is going for a lot. But yeah, that matter of fact, I'm about to. Yeah. Oh yeah, I deleted eBay from my phone because I was buying too much stuff. I was gonna pull it up and see, but no, it was ridiculous on eBay how much they were trying to sell it for. But yeah, no, that's what's up. Those are great games. So, I already kind of know the answer to this question, but do you all still play Sega today? And if so, on what hardware specifically? Or, I mean, Valentine, I'm assuming that you play on the original hardware, considering hardware is in your name, or do you all emulate, or how do you all play Sega today?
How I play Sega is mostly when I have the opportunity, I play it with emulation hardware.
Mhm.
My Ambernic Arc S and my GKD Bubble.
Mhm.
I play it like that, or I'll play it on PC with emulation and my wireless 8-bit DOE Saturn style controller. I'll play it like that, only mostly because I'm so busy. I'm writing. I'm trying to do some writing and doing some creative things that it's hard to sit down and spend an hour to 2 hour and 3 hours
Yeah.
a day to dedicate towards video games. I do have some hardware. Most of my hardware, and I know this is gonna sound bad, but I had to do this actually. I needed some money a couple of years ago, and I had to sell most of my collection. And
Oh,
that,
gotcha.
yeah, that really broke my heart, man. Because
Sometimes, pardon me. Sometimes you got to do what you got to do. You know what I'm saying? Like one thing I tell, like for those of you all who are watching who don't know, um, I I buy and resell iPhones for a living as part of what I do. And when people sell me their phones, like man, sometimes these specifically girls, man, they'll literally be crying, like selling me their 16 Pro Max or something like that because they're selling it because they're in a hard time and they need the money. And they're like, my baby, my baby. I'm like, look, it's not your baby. It's a phone, you know? And the good thing about stuff is you can always buy stuff later, you know? Like sometimes you gotta do what you gotta do to get out of a hard spot. You know what I mean? So if that's why you had to do it, Valentine, there's no reason to feel guilty, no reason to feel bad. Sometimes you gotta do what you gotta do.
And what I've got left though, I made sure I kept the good stuff.
Okay.
I have two Sega Dreamcasts. I have my original Sega Saturn I have,
Mhm.
and then I also have Sega Saturn games, and I have some Sega CD games.
Okay.
And yeah, I've kept most of that stuff. I don't really play it because I don't really want to touch it,
Yeah.
right now. I don't have the money to pay for repairs and stuff. So I just kind of leave it where it is. But, you know, I hate that I have to emulate, but at the moment that's the way it is unless Sega decides to grow a pair and put something out like a Switch or a Switch 2. Um, that's just how it is.
Yeah.
And I just hope that one day, something can happen where I can be a out and proud Sega fan again and not have to worry about Sega pimping itself out to other game consoles or going all digital, which is the absolute wrong direction for it to go. But yeah,
That's actually what I was gonna ask you all when you brought up the Switch. How do you all feel? How does it make you feel as a Sega fan knowing that like Switch has like Sega Genesis online?
I it it's a my opinion on that is a little bit nuanced. I would hate it normally, but then I realized what Sega's doing. Sega's basically using Nintendo like a one of those quarter machines in a grocery store. It has the little eggs in them that you can pay a quarter and get something out of. That's what Sega's doing with Nintendo. That's all they're doing. They're not really committing their games to Nintendo. They're just basically allowing you to rent them. And I don't see any problem with that because to me it's the same as going to a hotel and using a hotel system to rent video games on.
Yeah.
They're not permanently there. That's not their system. That's not something they have, their vested interest in. It's just another stream of revenue for them, which again I don't like natively because anything Sega should never be on Nintendo. No
Yeah.
offense, no offense to you
It's
Nintendo people, but
it's so crazy because like the generation that we come from, first off, when we were kids, we would have never imagined that ever would have never would have imagined that. And then like when it first happened for me, like I don't have a dog in the fight. I love Nintendo and Sega. Um, but for me, when I first saw Sega like on Nintendo, it was like disgusting. Like it was like such a gross feeling, you know? But now it's been here for so long that like it doesn't even. It's still weird. Don't get me wrong, but it's not like when I first saw it. But it's crazy because like this new generation, it's completely new to them. For all they know, like Sega is just Capcom, you know, like and they've been on Nintendo there since they were born. It's like it's so weird, man.
I realize it's been over 20 years.
Well, for me, I think it's really up to the parents of those people who are buying those kids those things
Yeah,
to teach them why it's gross and disgusting that Sega is on Nintendo.
yeah.
You know, there was a poll, a study done by a professional organization. I forgot the name of it. Please forgive me. But they did a study on how many people are into retro games. And more younger people are now into retro games than they are modern games because AAA games are terrible. They don't like them.
Microtransactions and
Yes, microtransactions, season passes, loot crates, just awful.
so much stuff, man. It's like
it's pathetic. It's just that you no longer own the games now.
it's
And that's
worse
the
than my bad. I was gonna say it's worse than like the arcade scene because the arcade scene was like taking everybody's money, making the games overly difficult just so people put in more quarter, more quarter, more quarter. It's worse than that.
That was just redemption because in arcades, they don't expect you to sit hours at one cabinet. I mean,
Yeah.
it's more of a casual type of thing. And that's how Sega is an arcade company. They've always been an arcade company. Now, to get back to the earlier point, I have 2 Sega Saturns. I have, of course, the original Xbox, and I have the original Dreamcast. Like I said, including the plastic briefcase that I got from '99. I have an American Saturn, the same one that I got in 1997. Still works. You got to use like a little penny or a coin to push open the slot. And I have a Japanese import Saturn, a white Saturn. And I have the Pro Action Replay, multi-cartridges, the adapters for both machines. So that I have enough storage on them and I have enough titles. But you still got to keep switching the batteries every few years so they expire. The CRT batteries inside of them. So I still have that. And I have a lot of Saturn games. I have several imports, including rare imports. I have Rockman X3. I have Garo Densu, which is Robot Fatal Fury Special. I have Street Fighter Collection. And I still have all the original Saturn games that I got from '97. And Sonic Camp. I got that Christmas '97. Rare. And it still works perfectly. The other part about it is that the other game that I think defined Sega was Fighters Mega Mix. And this was a few years before Super Smash Bros.
What's it called?
Fighters Mega Mix.
Okay.
Mega Mix. It says, combines Virtua Fighter and Fighting Vipers. And you got to play, you got to play as the Daytona car. There was and that's one name of my system, my any console, my 3DO system, is the character of Mexican Jumping Bean. There's a Mexican Jumping Bean that you have to unlock in the game. And it's crazy and it's zany and it's Japanese and it's very Japanese. But it's a fun fighting game. It's incredibly fun to play. There's a lot to do, a lot of things to unlock. It's a brilliant game. The other, Sega being on non-Sega platforms, it's something that I want to accept for a while. It's not that I accept it now, I don't, but I know it's a standard. The biggest thing that was offensive to me was Sega supporting PlayStation. I am one of those few that has a disdain for them. I don't like them.
So that's the perfect segue. Okay. Okay, so hold on. My bad. So for those of you all who don't know, who didn't see the live and kind of just what sparked this whole conversation in general is I was reacting to a video we're talking about how PlayStation, it was about how what was it about? It was basically about how PlayStation got started and according to Valentine, they were getting a lot of the facts wrong. And so he was just blowing up the comments. I'm like, man, come on and just tell me, enlighten us, share your wisdom, So right now we're going to go ahead into why Sega Resistance and Valentine despise PlayStation and and their relationship with Sega. All right, so you guys can go ahead and kick it off.
You want to start Valentine's, or you would like me to start?
I can go.
Go
All right.
ahead.
I love PlayStation, by the way.
No.
I love all games, man.
No, it's cool. I mean, some people have that attitude. I used to have that attitude before Nintendo came out, the NES. I was Atari, ColecoVision, and television. I was around.
Yeah.
I didn't really have the reason I was like that was because there wasn't one that really spoke to my soul in a way,
Yeah.
Sega did, and that's why I was there. But let's talk about PlayStation. Okay, so
Right.
Sony started in video games, but they started in video games in a very weird way, kind of like how Sega did. Sega never began as a arcade game manufacturer. They began as a company out of Hawaii, so they were originally an American company, and Sega began as a slot machine company. You go up, you play slots, you spend your money, whatever, and they were basically a gambling company. And back then, and I'm not sure if it's still the same today or not, but back then, pinball was considered gambling.
Yeah, it was illegal. A lot of
In the 40s,
actually,
I believe.
I saw this. It's part of me to cut you off. I saw this documentary talking about pinball, and for those of you all who don't know, like a lot of the early pinball machines didn't even have the flappers. And so it was like basically just chance. And they actually had to there was a case where they had to bring the pinball machine in the court, and they had to show the judge that like it's not just luck, that there is skill involved. And so I don't remember what happened, but like the ball went the way however the ball went, it was like it just so happened to be luck that it ended up going in their favor. And I can't remember the whole story, but look up the history of pinball. It's crazy. My bad, Valentine. Keep going.
It's okay. That was important. That was an important thing to say because if it wasn't for Sega or back then Service Games, which Sega stands for, I'm not sure if people know that. Sega stands for Service Games. It's just the SE from Service and GA from Games cut off and put together. If it wasn't for Sega and their gambling games, then there wouldn't be the rules that Congress. Then this was the official first act of Congress getting involved with video games. Congress had to make a law. They passed a law. I can't remember the name of the law. I think it's like something 31 or something, that where they passed this law that says you can't have gambling machines or anything like that, like gaming or anything. They call it gaming, even though it's not gaming, it's gambling, but they call it gaming. You know how they call casinos gaming?
Mm-hmm.
So they said no gaming machines can be outside of U.S. bases. You have to be off the base, like away from the base. So, Sony kind of had a similar kind of weird start in that they signed up for what's called the MSX standard. That's the Microsoft standard. Microsoft, instead of working in the US, went to Japan. And I don't know if any one of your viewers or maybe you remember that movie, Pirates of Silicon Valley, where yeah, you should see that movie. It tells the tale of how Microsoft got started and how Apple got started and how Microsoft and Bill Gates basically backstabbed Steve Jobs. Yeah, it was.
Yeah. I do know about. I just recently watched something. It wasn't that documentary, but basically, Steve Jobs and Bill Gates were friends, and they were they basically stole Xerox's idea of using the mouse, and because that wasn't the thing. And Steve Jobs came and said, hey, we're gonna, go ahead and do this. If you, Bill Gates, if you could just wait, if you could just hold off, don't put it, on your computers or whatever until this date. Now I don't remember what happened. It like passed the deadline or something. But yeah, Steve, everybody, everybody's backstabbing everybody.
Yeah, this was the early days of computers, so nobody had a standard yet.
Yeah.
And what Apple did is Apple, that Apple Macintosh, that what they call the GUI or the user interface, they stole that user interface from Xerox. And then Bill Gates, basically in Pirates of Silicon Valley, in a tense moment, says to Steve Jobs, "Oh yeah, like what? You guys didn't steal that stuff from Xerox? Like they had this door. We had this neighbor that had their back door open all the time, and you came in and you stole something, and I came in and I stole something. It's like we both stole from them. We're both pirates." So anyway, long story short, what Bill Gates did was Bill Gates was not allowed to make a computer software because he was working with Apple to put Word on Apple. I think it was Word, and he was working with Apple. But what he ended up doing was he ended up going to Japan and starting stuff, and he started to do stuff with operating systems. So what Bill Gates did and Microsoft did was they developed this company with ASCII Corporation, ASCII Corporation from Japan. These two companies, ASCII Corporation, a Japanese company, and Microsoft, a US-based company out of Washington, they decided to get together and create this standard called the MSX standard. And basically what that did is it created a standard for Japanese and Japanese computers. Sony was one of the companies that signed up to this standard. Now, basically MSX said any company can build an MSX computer so long as you agree to the standard. You have to have this hardware and this much RAM, and you have to have this operating system. You can't deviate too much. We'll let you deviate on the RAM, but not too much else. So Sony was taking part of that, and they did that, and they were part of the MSX standard for a long time. Why is that important? Because a lot of video games that we know, especially on the NES, especially that came out on other systems, were developed, and their first versions were actually put out on MSX.
Like
so
Metal
stuff, stuff like Castlevania, stuff like that, stuff like Metal Gear Solid was on MSX.
Oh wow!
So
I love Metal Gear.
Yeah, that was an MSX game. They had both of them. They had Metal Gear Solid and Metal Gear Solid Snake on MSX. So that stuff was way before NES came out, way before Sega and everything. So Sony was a part of that. So Sony had an idea of what it was like to compete in a market of home-based systems that played video games. It wasn't the same, but it was similar because almost all MSXs had cartridge slots. So it was very similar to a home console. It wasn't until later when Sega started to have troubles with the 32X and the Sega CD, and they started to fail in the market a little bit after Genesis came out, that Sony decided they wanted to get in. But it wasn't Sony's thought wasn't directly at Sega. They were noticing a lull in the market, and they thought this would be a great opportunity to see what they could do. So what happened was that Sega came out with the Sega CD. The Sega CD was a big deal, but it was such a big deal, it scared the holy you-know-what out of Nintendo. Nintendo was scared, okay, like scared. So what they did is they teamed up with Sony because Sony had the CD side of it. So Sony and Nintendo decided to team up, and they started to create this console together that looked like a Super Nintendo and a Sony like disk drive that was like a front loading disk drive, not a top loading disk drive. And they teamed up to create this prototype, but Sony does what Sony does. So Sony said, we want X amount from you, Nintendo. We want, and from what I remember, I could be wrong. Sega Renaissance here might be able to correct me for a few minutes. Is from what I remember, Sony wanted a piece of Nintendo's IP. They wanted a piece of Mario. They wanted a piece of Zelda. They wanted a piece of all this stuff. And Nintendo said, no, we don't want to do that. So they separated.
And see, hold on one second. I'm sorry. And see, that's the part of the story that's always left out. Because if you're a gamer, chances are you've probably heard of Nintendo and Sony coming together and making the PlayStation 2 words. You know what I mean? Like that's like fun trivia history. And then you're like, oh, you know, Nintendo, the way history is painted it is, you know, Nintendo or like just Sony left and did their own. It's like a lot of ambiguity. Is that even the right word? I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, cool. It's like a lot of ambiguity in the story, but you don't ever hear about Sony wanting the IP or any of that.
Yeah. So Sony wanted a piece. Nintendo said, no, get to the curb. So what Sony did was they started looking around for anyone or anything else that could help them out, because now what they're kind of stuck, right? Sony spent time and effort putting together this hardware, right? Putting together this stuff. So they're like, well, what do we do with this stuff? We need to make our money back on this. What are we going to do? We can't put it out there as a CD player because this is more than a CD player. So what do we do? So what they did was they were looking around to see if anybody would do anything, because they didn't have a plan. So they were just kind of looking around and see what was going on. Well, at this time, Sega decided to slide down the hill. Now, that's an entirely different stream. I am totally happy to talk to you about it one time. But for this stream, I just wanted to say, or this video, I wanted to say, okay, Sony found out that Sega was having trouble. They talked to Tom Kalinske. Tom Kalinske was the head of Sega of America, that branch of Sega. And he was in charge of that branch of Sega. So him and someone else, I can't remember who it was. Maybe there was someone in between them. Yes,
Michael
yes. Katz and Kalinske kind of talked with Sony, and Sony kind of got in their ear. You know, like in Lord of the Rings, with Wormtongue, how he gets in the ear of the king, and that's basically what Sony did. Sony got into the ear of Tom Kalinske, convinced him it was a good idea for them to work together and create this thing called the Sega PlayStation, right? So think about it. Your PlayStation could have had Sega Sony PlayStation on it. Wow. So what Sony did is they basically convinced Tom and his engineers to work with them in order to get something going on. Now, they got to a point where they got a good enough prototype where Tom and the head of Sony went over to see Sega's head at that time, the CEO of Sega of Japan, which is the home office. So that's basically where everybody has to report to, is Sega of Japan. So Sega Japan is the daddy and the mama. So the head CEO of Sega of Japan was Hayao Nakayama.
Yep.
And Hayao Nakayama, he said to Sony, no, you don't know what do you know? It basically, in a famous quote, he says to Sony, what do you know about video games? You don't know anything about video games. You've never made any video games before. What do you know? And I think Sony maybe gave him a little back talk or something, because there is a rumor that he ended up throwing a chair at the CEOs of Sony.
Oh my gosh.
And
Ken Kutaragi
kicked him out of the office. So basically that ruined the relationship between Sega of Japan and Sega of America. Tom Kalinske and Hayao Nakayama had a ruined relationship from there.
That'll do it if you throw a chair at somebody.
Well, I mean, he threw a chair at him because they wouldn't listen. The CEO of Sony wouldn't listen. So when that completely broke up, eventually at that, like maybe a year or two later, like in 93, 94, Sony said, I think it was 93. Sony came out and said, remember that video? Remember they were saying in that video how Sony came out and they just dropped the price and said nothing else?
Yeah.
Remember that?
Yeah.
That was because Sony had been working, their engineers had been working with Sega's engineers. And basically, it's my opinion. This is not a fact. I don't have anything to back it up other than circumstantial evidence, what is in history, and what we know from what we can put together is that Sony basically, in my opinion, stole Sega hardware for their Sony PlayStation. They stole it because in the book Console Wars, there is a section of the book that says that Sega of America's engineers and Sony's engineers, quote unquote, worked closely together. And then shortly after that, the Sony PlayStation come out. Now, come on. If you're a company and you're Sony and you're known to do this kind of stuff, especially with Nintendo, and what happened with Nintendo and why they weren't working with Nintendo anymore. And then all of a sudden, you're getting a chair thrown at you by Hayao Nakayama, the CEO and president of Sega of Japan, the parent company of Sega. And then all of a sudden, a few months later, you're coming out with a new game console. Where did you get all this technology from? You just decided you were doing this while you were, quote unquote, working with Sega's engineers? I'm sorry, that's a little too convenient for me. So Sony, from that point forward, started pushing PlayStation stuff. And then Sega went downhill. Now, I'm going to cut this off here so I can let Sega Renaissance come in with some information, lay down some facts for you, or maybe some of his opinions. But what happened is a lot of people believe Sega had two different kinds of Sega Saturns they were going to sell people. They were going to sell them a high-level model and a low-level model. The high-level model was more based on 2D games and multimedia. So, things like that Sega Saturn card you can put into the back of the Saturn that will play video CDs.
Right.
That's what Sega was thinking with this console. They wanted to have two different models of Saturn in order to cover these two different segments of the video game industry. So they created the 2D one with the two VDPs because they knew they wanted to use that for multimedia. And what they were working on was a second model. This second model was going to be focused on 3D. And what they did was they started working together with their arcade division and coming up with prototypes for this system called Sega Jupiter. This system was supposed to be the second version of the Sega Saturn that was going to be just for 3D.
Jupiter, Saturn. Okay, that's dope. Never heard of that console. That's super interesting.
So what happened was, and it was supposed to, and what it was internally, from what we've learned from online internet and from other people who know other people in the actual business out there in California, was that this was supposed to be a cartridge system. But what Sony did was Sony saw an opportunity to steal, and they basically, in my opinion, took the specs of the Sega Jupiter hardware, kicked that over to their design that they had with Nintendo with the CD side, put them two together, and they basically put some off-the-shelf parts in there and kind of basically leveled it out while they were off talking to Sega of Japan. Wow. And they were doing this in Japan at Sony Corporation in order to get all this hardware worked out, just in case Sega said no. Well, of course, Sega's going to say no. So what Sony did is they put this together. Now, proof, I think what is proof of this is if you look at all the different versions of the original PlayStation. Why were there different versions of the PlayStation? Some had different connectors. Some had the connectors in different spots.
Had like the PS1, like the little mini.
No, not quite to that yet. Before that, they had all these different versions of the original PlayStation that had all the different TV outputs and different spots on the back. Why? Why did they have that there? Because the hardware wasn't finished. And by 2000, 2001, Sony admitted the hardware wasn't finished. And that's why they had to create the PlayStation 1, or PSONE, the PlayStation 1. That console is also not completely finished, but what it does tell is there's a telltale sign that Sony didn't actually design the PlayStation from the beginning to be what it was supposed to be, because some of the games that worked on older PlayStations didn't work on the new PlayStation because the system wasn't complete. They stole it, in my opinion, put all that stuff together, took off the shelf parts, and created a system and sold it under cost under Saturn. That's why I'm not saying I despise Sony. I just really don't like what they did to Sega. But from my point of view, Sony waves around their money and goes and grabs all these game developers, puts them on PlayStation, and now the rest is history. Oh, by the way, Nintendo wouldn't have the Nintendo 64 if it wasn't for what happened between Sega CD and Sega Saturn. Because what happened in between there, a company called SGI, which is Silicon Graphics, I guess, Institute or Silicon Graphics Incorporated, they had this 3D graphics chip they wanted to sell Sega and be a part of their next game console. And Hayao Nakayama brought three of his best engineers over 3 times to America to see what SGI was working on, and 3 times they rejected them. They rejected them 3 times because they had already had this idea for 2 different kinds of Saturns, but they rejected SGI. Tom Kalinske told the head of SGI to go up to Redmond, Washington, to a company called Nintendo. So Nintendo got SGI's hardware. And again, the way you know that this hardware was not designed for Nintendo was that the first couple of games that came out on the Nintendo 64 had trouble playing on the Nintendo 64. That's a clear sign that that hardware was not originally designed for that system and that they had to tweak it. So those 2 signs right there tell me, and should tell you, that both the Nintendo 64 and the Sony PlayStation had Sega hardware in it. Essentially what I consider Sega hardware, even though it wasn't officially Sega, but they were working and tweaking it for Sega. So as far as I'm concerned, Nintendo 64, Sony PlayStation, and Sega Saturn are all Sega. That's all Sega hardware. So that's my bit of it. I'm going to turn it over to Sega Renaissance. I know we're at the hour mark, so go ahead, dude.
All right, here's what happened between Sony and Nintendo regarding the CD add-on. In the summer of 1988, a few months after the Sega Mega Drive is announced in Japan, Nintendo starts development of the Super Famicom or the Famicom 2. Nintendo was looking for a solution early on to find a way to have Famicom games playable on the Famicom 2. Sony developed an APU, basically a accelerator processor, and patented it. And they were pitching it to Nintendo because at the time Sony had also developed a wave sound chip for the new Famicom 2. Mm-hmm. They pitched it to Nintendo. The Klaus and that, when they pitched it to Nintendo, stated that Sony would have ODM control of the Famicom, most control of the design of the patents, and Nintendo didn't like that. So Nintendo went to, WDC, who developed the Apple IIgs CPU, the MOS 6502 that powers the Apple IIgs, mm-hmm. and they went and did a system on the chip variation for the Famicom 2. They went also and they had Sharp. They went to Sharp and had Sharp develop a coprocessor instead of Sony. But Sony stayed on because what happened is that Nintendo reduced their contract and came up with a different class. So Sony was able to build the sound system. Now, around 1990, this is when Sega decides, which became the Sega CD, the Sega Earth project, which started off in 88 as a Laserdisc add-on for Mega Drive, which eventually evolved into a CD add-on because of the EDC PC Engine CD. Mm-hmm. Sony and Nintendo are concerned about this new Mega CD. They're concerned that it might have the potential to move the standard over from cartridges to CD. So what Nintendo does, because they're figuring, okay, Sony co-developed compact disc in the Green Book standard with Philips. Let's trust them to come up with an add-on. So they come up with an add-on, and they ask Sony to put together something to pitch to them, a prototype. Nintendo puts together their own thing with Sony, which is called the Super Famicom CD. But Sony comes and puts their own design together, and they call that PlayStation. They come up with their Klaus, and Nintendo has their Klaus. Nintendo's Klaus says Sony is relegated to second-party duties. The second-party duties is simple as that you do the drivers, and that's mostly it, and you have some of the patents, but we still have our large percent. We control ODM, you have OEM. Sony's thing was they wanted to have the rights to use Nintendo's IPs, and they wanted 80% control of the add-on PlayStation. They wanted also ODM rights, and they wanted the rights to be able to license any games on their end without Nintendo's consent.
Yeah, they did. They didn't know Nintendo.
Yeah, they wanted Nintendo. Basically, they were trying to get Nintendo to give the add-on, the design away to Sony and let Sony have most power. So they got pissed. I mean, angry, of course, pissed off. From the front. So they got really angry. Nintendo did, and Nintendo put their clouds together. And this is late 1990, early 1991, and Nintendo says you take it or leave it, especially for Super Famicom, which is about to come to the U.S. the Super NES. You're gonna do our clouds. And Sony said, no, we're gonna take our ball and go home. It's like, what? Yeah, we're just gonna take our ball and go home. The design wasn't patented, so they were able to claim the PlayStation as theirs. So they took the design, they took the patents. Now in the middle of that, they got word that the Sega, the Mega CD was going to come to the States, but they didn't know much details about what was being planned because back then, Sega America and Sega Japan did their own thing. They did their own thing. They went to their own partners in business and that like that. So first of all, Ken Kutaragi and Kei Harzai, their idea is if they go to Sega Japan, they might find out what's going on, what they're planning after the Mega Drive. And their design, the idea was to try to eavesdrop and take their blueprints and take their specs and build something better. So they didn't have an R&D team. Sony didn't have it. So what Sony did is they went to Sega Japan. They mostly showcased what was left over from the PlayStation, but they stole a bunch of demos. They ripped them off. They took demos and they knocked them off. They ripped them off from 486 computers, 486 PCs, and passed it off as coming from them. And that's what pissed Sega off. Wow. Is that they lied to Sega of Japan and their development team, their R&D team, Sega Way, and told them that this is what we have. And they come to find out, no, they took a bunch of 486 PCs and passed it off as their own. They didn't have anything to pitch, nothing. So they got thrown out of the office because they didn't have anything up there. That's why Nakayama got angry. So they realized that Nakayama doesn't correspond that much to Sega America. So in early 92, they decided to go to Sega America and find out what's going on. They go through if you get through the front door and get information as a spy, you go through the back door. So they went through the back door. They went to Sega of America. They went up to Tom Kalinske and Michael Katz and even Joe Miller, and they said, "Hey, can we license the OEM for the Sega CD here?" Sure. Without telling them we don't have the license rights to that. JVC does. And in the middle of that, they find out that Sega Japan had put up a $4 billion deal in 1990 in their parent company CSK Holdings with NASA and Lockheed Martin defense contractor to develop aerospace 3D graphics and mapping graphics for their arcades and their consoles. So in the middle of that, they had a project called Jupiter going on. That project was supposed to be basically a 32-bit system using Model 1 type of 3D back in 92. Sony gets a hold of all that. And because all these designs are all cartridge-based, they say we can do a CD add-on. A CD variation of that. And they get Sega of America to sign away that give away blueprints and specs and designs. And they tell them in early '93, we're both going to go together and we're going to pitch it to Sega of Japan. We're going to pitch it to Haya Nakayama and Hideki Sato and Masami Ishikawa. We're gonna pitch it to them. So what Sony does, they go and get a 486. They use off-the-shelf parts of the same 486 that they showed off, and they tried to pass off to Sega as their own prototypes. And they go to NEC and ask NEC to take a MIPS and variate that MIPS. So they don't say anything to Sega America. They do it behind their back, and they do it behind closed doors. Sega America is expecting to hear from them at the beginning of 1993. 1993 comes in. The end of the first quarter comes in. They contact Sony. Faxes don't get answered. Phone calls don't get answered. Electronic mail doesn't get answered. And within maybe 8 months into that, rather 10 months later, at the end of that year, PlayStation gets announced in Japan.
Wow.
Where do they get the hardware from? Where do they come from? The other part about it is that Haya Nakayama sends prototypes of what was called the Giga Drive Mars project, which is a System 32 based Genesis successor that they were working on in '91 that they scrapped. They send that to Sega of America and they say, can you take System 32 and build an upgrade to Sega CD using those chips? So when they send it to them, they find out that Sega of America and Sony have been talking and partnering with each other in '92. Then they realize that all the project secrets of Jupiter, that phase that was being planned, was given to Sony. Then they realize, what are they going to do with Jupiter now? On top of that, you have another project going on at AM3, their R&D and their arcade division. And it's and that's what she was meant, that's what Valentine's mentioning. Basically, it was called Project Aurora. It's a 64-bit 2D only machine, a full 2D only multi-interactive powerhouse. And it was called Project Aurora. The middle of that, for Jupiter, they had another solution where instead of Model 1, because they had showed off another arcade machine called Model 2, they showed off Model 1 in Japan, and at the arcade trade show it flopped. They were not impressed. Japanese spectators were completely unimpressed by it. So they scrapped plans to go forward with Model 1 and instead try to do something with Model 2. There wasn't any time to really engineer something to get to that. So they had to come up with something close to that. So phase 2 of Jupiter, they start over with Jupiter with this phase. What happened, and this is where the Sega Saturn came from, they took the Aurora and they took the Jupiter phase 2 and combined it into one console. They named it Jupiter to Saturn, the next logical step. And that's where Sega Saturn came from. Sega Saturn is a 2D and 3D hybrid, but it is a 32-bit 2D machine, 3D machine, and 64-bit 2D machine. It's a 64-bit machine, but they didn't fully iron out, because we'll go into that much later in another stream, about how the biggest, because Sega had 3 other projects going on at once. After Genesis, they didn't really know what they wanted to do. Long story short, the PlayStation is announced in December of '93 in Japan. In early '94, it's announced early. This is where Nintendo got sidetracked. Now, she wanted to explain what happened with the 064 chipset. So I'm gonna continue from there. After Kalinski's successful pitch to Nintendo of America, Nintendo learned about the announcement of the PlayStation. They were completely caught off guard. They were taken aback because Nintendo's plan was to come up with a 2D only 32-bit machine that was codenamed Reality. They had another chipset that they were planning for a 16-bit Game Boy that was called Atlantis. So there were 2 things going on at once. When they see the PlayStation, they're completely taken off guard. They realize that, oh my goodness, and they don't have anything to compete. They don't have anything to build. So the Game 64 chipset from SGI is a godsend, and they decided to go with that. What happens with Sega is that they don't have enough time to fully iron out the hardware for the new Saturn. They had already decided that's what they're going to do because they had already spent all their money. Yeah. So 4 months into its taping and design, the parent company owner and Sega chairman, back with horrible person, Isao Okawa, he ordered them to rush the design into production 4 months too early. So the Sega Saturn design was never fully finished. It was
Wow.
almost finished, but the design, that's why it was so complex, because the engineers did not have enough time to iron it out. Now, the reason why I want to say about Sony is he's right. Sony is very crafty. Sony built the PlayStation brand on the idea of being a second party company and OEM. They could just take other designs and they could find legal loopholes around that. So the Sony PlayStation is stolen Sega hardware. The Dreamcast launch ad campaign, with the Japanese thief, that alludes to what happened. That's what happened. That's the whole point of that commercial, is that's what Sony did. They had a spy that stole their hardware from Jupiter, and she's trying to do the same thing with the Dreamcast.
I gotta see.
Yeah, it's called The Thief, and it's a launch it's a launch campaign commercial for the Dreamcast from 1999. Now, the long story short, the reason why I don't like Sony, because they are money hatters. They don't license their games; they pay them off. They bribe publishers. They bribe game sites to overhype games for PlayStation. But the other part about it is that they lied about PlayStation 2. The PlayStation 2 was weaker than all the other systems, even Dreamcast. It was even inferior. The PlayStation 2 was basically a powered PC 2 with added extra threads. All the graphics on the PlayStation 2 were completely built on a software suite called Emotion Engine developed by LucasArts. The PlayStation 2 was weaker than the Dreamcast because it didn't have the ability to do TTNL, which is translucency and tessellation and lighting. It didn't have hardware lighting. And it didn't have anti-aliasing. But Sony was able to use the theoretical specs of that and just lie to people and tell them that's why they came up with 75 million polygons, which if you work with PS2 hardware, you'll find out that that's not true. So, and the other part I don't like is that with PS4, the PS4 isn't a console. It's just an AMD bulldozer PC rig with a updated GPU. So it's old late 2000s PC hardware that's passed off as a game system. I don't like Sony PlayStation because they don't have anything original. They don't have good first-party games. Or the only one I can think of is maybe Twisted Metal, Armored Core, but that was about it. But
Twisted
Metal, yeah, one of the they're probably one of the few times they really, because Last of Us is garbage. It's
what about Spider-Man?
Spider-Man was done well, but it was too tied to the fact that Sony had the license with the film and all that. But it was, but Sony first party wise just doesn't have the talent of Sega or Nintendo. They don't when it comes to their in-house development. But Twisted Metal was, like I said, the only thing that I can remember where they really had something special. And Armored Core was really good. Bushido Blade was fun for maybe about 30 minutes and got really boring. And most of PlayStation's first party stuff is trash. Like they had a development studio called 989 in the late 90s, and they made some of the worst. Like they made Twisted Metal sequels. They made a Jet Moto, just awful development, just really shy. But long story short, another thing I don't like about PlayStation is that they're dubious. They market their thing. They're not honest in their advertising with their brand, and they don't tell it's a bait and switch they like to do. So that's the thing that I don't like about PlayStation. Even PS5, it was not new. PS5 is the Xbox One X, but it has a modified, enhanced Vega GPU. The Xbox One X and PS5 have the same specs. It's just that the PS5 is running a Vega GPU that's passing itself off as a knock. That's why graphically it doesn't look that good. I mean, any NVIDIA card from the Turing looks better than PS5. Any of those, even the Super Turing, looks far better than it. So, like I said, my whole thing, that's my opinion. I don't like PlayStation because I don't see them as legitimate or authentic. And I feel like that they've kind of always played a game of smoke and mirrors and carnival tricks to get people to take them seriously gaming-wise, because they never had their in-house development. They didn't bring out the original PlayStation on their own. they went and they spied and they took other people's hardware and designs to do it. So, like I said, that's my end. That's kind of I'm off my soapbox, but that's my end of things, and that's why I do not like PlayStation. And that's my opinion. The facts are, yes, the PlayStation 1 was stolen Sega Junior hardware.
So I found that commercial.
Yeah, here it is.
Commercial. I want to go ahead and pull it up. All right.
We got her.
That was funny. All right, hold on. Go ahead and all right, I'm glad I was able to pull that up. Oh, hey, that was risky business. Me trying to. This is software I've not used before. It was risky business trying to figure out how to pull up the share screen on this and not disconnect everything.
Congratulations.
I appreciate
All right. You know how they said the Nintendo Switch is the most successful video game console launch in history? Well, excuse me, like almost all things Nintendo has in terms of like the Nintendo Wii controller and other things that Nintendo claims to have invented, Sega did it first. Sega did it first with the Sega Dreamcast on 9/9/99. It was the most successful video game console launch in all of entertainment. Says that right on the cover of a few video game magazines at the time. And like Next Gen Magazine. Next Gen Magazine had this all orange magazine cover for Sega Dreamcast when it came out, 9/9/99 on it. It's called it the biggest video game or the biggest night in entertainment history for sales in terms of video game and entertainment. And Sega did it first. Also, Sega had a prototype for the Sega Dreamcast that had a controller that, if you look at it, kind of looks like a really big Wii remote. So Sega, and not only that, but let's go back to PlayStation. You know, the Sony PlayStation Vita, the D-pad on the Vita. Guess what that looks like? That looks like a Sony version of the Sega Game Gear D-pad. So yeah, Sony and Nintendo still stealing from Sega. The whole industry still stealing from Sega, in my opinion.
I was trying to see if I could find the magazine. What magazine did you say that was?
It was Next Generation Magazine.
And Electronic Gaming Monthly.
It was just called Next Gen, NEXTGEN, or just NXTGEN, Next Gen, and it has the orange cover with the Dreamcast logo on it. It says 9/9/99 on it.
Yeah, Electronic Gaming Monthly as well, EGM. Because I had that issue too. It says 9/9/99, the biggest day in entertainment history, and it has a question mark, and it's completely orange. It says Electronic Gaming Monthly. It's September 1999 issue.
I could be wrong. Could be EGM, but I just remember it being Big Orange magazine.
I think it's Next Gen was not fans of Sega. They weren't. They were not Sega fans. They didn't like Sega. I know that.
I found their coverage of Sega to be okay. They were kind of more of a multi-console magazine, kind of like how GamePro was.
Yeah, I was more of a EGM fan. I loved EGM, and I kind of loved that because I felt like they were way more sophisticated than everybody else. And everybody took a lot of their game reviews are like they blasted Superman 64. Everybody grew to hate it because of their review of Superman 64. They blasted that game. And everybody hated that game because of what EGM said.
While you're doing that, I just wanted to bring up real quick about Isao Okawa. Back in 1969, Sega was a company called Sega Enterprises. Now, Sega became Sega Enterprises because of Sega of Japan, and
It's
kind of like that, but the magazine is all orange. So I think it might be that Next Gen magazine. No, there it is, right there. Electronic Gaming Monthly. That's it, right there.
Oh, right here.
Yeah, see that? That 99, the biggest 24 hours in entertainment history. Take that, Nintendo. Take that, buddy. You like to say that about your Switch 2. Sega did it first.
Sold 300,000 units that day, and Sega made over $100 million in pre-tax profits just that day. And we're talking 1999 money.
Anyway,
let me ask you guys though. My bad.
Yeah, no. It's your show, man.
Since it was the biggest selling console, did you guys know a lot of people who had one? Because I had one, but I didn't know anyone else who had one. But
oh yeah, I gotta tell you my Christmas story. Can I tell you my Christmas story?
Yeah, go for it.
All right. In that year, around Christmas time, I got my graduation money from my grandmother. Okay, I was lucky, and because I didn't expect to get anything, right? But I got some graduation money from my grandmother. So the first thing I did was I bought 5 new Dreamcast games, launch games, and I bought a Sega Dreamcast with an extra controller. While I was doing that, there was a guy in line. There were a lot of people in line buying the Sega Dreamcast. There was this guy in line who wanted to buy a Sega Dreamcast. He stepped up. He put his money down, but the cashier said, "Hey man, you need to have X amount of money." He's like, "I don't have it," and so he steps back, right, thinking like I thought he was gonna leave, but he's just standing there looking like real pitiful looking, right? So I'm standing up there. I buy my stuff, and then I have some money left over. So I turn and I look at him and I say, "Hey, you got a family or something?" He's like, "Yeah, I was gonna get it for my kids and stuff, but I guess I can't get it." I'm like, "Well, hold on a minute." So I took out some money and I helped this dude buy a Dreamcast for his family. So this dude,
awesome.
yeah, I love doing that because I was like, you're gonna have a good Christmas. Your dad's gonna bring you something home. It's gonna be a great memory. So I was like, all right, I can help this dude out. So I helped him out. I gave the cashier some money, helped pay this dude for his Dreamcast for his kids. And that's what stuck with me all this years is that there are so many people bought the Sega Dreamcast. And to me, it was a big turning point because this was the first 128-bit console in the history of video games, like true 128-bit.
The Sega Master System was such a underrated console. Like to me, like that. Its graphics. I mean, back then, what was the competition right then at that point in time? Was it the PS2? Is that what was
it? Yes. What it was, and I'll let Valentine's. I'll tell a little bit about before he explains more. Nintendo of America at that time.
Oh, my bad. I'm sorry. My bad. Hold on. I wasn't trying to go into history quite yet.
The competition at the time of the Master System was the NES.
No, not the Master System. The Dreamcast.
Yeah, PS2 didn't come out until a year later.
Okay, so it was the PS1 that it was.
It was PS1 and N64.
Okay, because I remember having it at that time and just always saying, these graphics are so much better than the PS1. I couldn't remember which one I was comparing it to at that point. I want to ask you all this because I want to talk about the history, but I really want to talk to you guys about you guys. You know what I'm saying? Like that's more interesting to me than the history because I care about you guys' stories,
Mm-hmm.
and I know it's a lot of people who can relate to you all stories, and that's one of the things I want to do on this channel is just get like everyday folk and see what's your history with video games. You know what I mean? And a lot of people are diehard Nintendo fans, and I know Sega has a cult following as well. But while we're on the topic of the Dreamcast, what are you all's top 3 Dreamcast games? I want to say mine really quick. Jet Grind Radio.
Awesome.
Jet Grind Radio, Unreal Tournament, and I'm gonna come back to you with the third one. I had the third one, but I can't remember it. It's not Crazy Taxi. You know what I mean? I want to, but go ahead.
Soul Calibur, which blew everybody away. Soul Calibur,
Yes.
everybody was just blown away by it. It
Yes.
was just a flawless. It was rebuilt for Dreamcast hardware, even better than its arcade counterpart, and more technically advanced. I would say Adventure. Adventure is still a very authentic, really, really pure, polished, and really great 3D game, late 90s 3D platform to play, because you don't realize that it was, I mean, Mario 64 wasn't even that good, but it was new. 3D platforming was still very new. The other last Dreamcast, was Marvel versus Capcom 2, the greatest port, the most invaluable version of Marvel vs. Capcom. Everybody says the Dreamcast one is the definitive one. Everyone. They forget about the PS2 one. They don't even bother with that one. Or the really, really, really crappy PSP version. It's the Dreamcast of Marvel vs. Capcom 2. That version. It goes for a lot of money too. I even repurchased it a few years ago. That's how invaluable it is.
What did I say was my 2? I said
Jagger on Radio, which is fantastic. Forgot the other one you said. Jagger on Radio. Sorry about that.
no, you're cool. I don't remember if I said Unreal or not.
Yeah, you did.
Okay, that was it. Okay, yeah, those might have been the 2 games I played the most. I don't know if I had a whole bunch of Dreamcast games when I was a kid, but those were probably my top 2. It was like playing Capture the Flag on Unreal. It's crazy to think about Unreal and just what it's become. You know, like that's a whole nother story. But yeah, what about you, Valentine?
Well, first I want to apologize for talking too much about history. If I would have known you wanted more about my personal story, I would have done that. So I apologize for that.
No. I'm here for both. You know, I'm here for both. So I asked you all the question, and the conversation is a continuation from our original conversation. And on our original conversation, we talked about the history. That was how it, started off. And we talked about your personal. But yeah, no, it's nothing to be sorry about. It's all interesting. We all love games. We all love game history, and we love gamers. You know what I'm saying? So
yeah,
go ahead.
My top probably I have 5. My top are probably the launch 5 that I bought when I initially bought it. So that would be Soul Calibur, Dead or Alive 2. I wish it was Dead or Alive Ultimate, but Dead or Alive 2.
Dead or Alive was a good game.
And I like, in fact, if you would give me a second, I can go grab my thing that has those 5 games in it, and I can just rattle them off real quick.
Okay.
So give me a second. I won't be gone too long. I'm just gonna step over here for a second.
Actually, give me 1 second too. I'm when it comes out, we're gonna edit. I'm gonna edit this part out.
No problem.
Hold on. Where's my pen so I can write down timestamp?
Send myself email this.
Let's see.
I do my 3D OLED console.
Hold on 1 second, Valentine. Don't say it yet.
This is where having a collection helps. Okay.
Hold on. Don't say it yet, Valentine.
Okay.
Hold on 1 second. Where's my pen at? Can somebody write down this timestamp for me? Actually, I can put it in my phone.
So
I'm gonna step away really quick. Let's see, 124. I'll have my editor edit this part out. Okay, 1 second, guys.
problem.
Okay. So
All right.
let me write this time down. 124. So 126. Okay. No. Okay, cool. My bad. So you got that, but I also, before you share your list, I want to show everyone in the what book were you quoting from?
Which book?
The book I was quoting from is called Console Wars.
Oh,
Okay.
you know what? I thought I had that book. I don't have that book. I was going to show people the book that you were talking about. I don't have that book. I have Console Chronicles.
Ah, that looks cool.
Yeah, this book is pretty dope. And then this is you know, are you familiar with Retro Dodo?
Yes.
Yeah, these are his books. He this one, and then a handheld history.
No, yeah.
I backed this book. Got my dad's name put in it because
I find some of Retro Dodo's opinions on some of the handhelds to be kind of, they're a little unforgiving. I'll
like
say it that
just an
way.
example.
Well, there was a few handhelds that came out a few years ago from Ambernick that he pretty much, in my opinion, when I watched the video reviews of them,
Mhm.
to me it looked like he just went negative because that's the way the algorithm was. So whether the handheld actually was that way or not, he just kind of went all negative with it.
Mm.
And I watched a few other channels reviews on it, and they didn't have the same opinion. So that kind of skews my view, but that doesn't mean he's not correct in some of the things he's saying. He certainly is, and he certainly has his own opinions. I'm not going to skew his stuff. I'm not here to cause any trouble or anything. I'm just saying, from my point of view, it just seems like he went negative for the algorithm on a few of these. But anyway, if you want my list, I can go ahead and give that to you.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. So I like a lot of the launch games I bought. So that would be Sonic Adventure, Power Stone, Dead or Alive 2, Soul Calibur, Shenmue. But I also like one of the games that came out later, and that's called Skies of Arcadia. It's a great RPG. Those games I like. I also like the new version of the Saturn. What's an updated Saturn version on the Dreamcast called Daytona USA. And
Oh, yeah.
those are my favorites.
I remember that.
Yep, those are my favorite.
That's what's up.
There's also Power Stone 2, which I also have. My little brother liked it. Power Stone 2.
Power Stone 2, I don't think that came out on Dreamcast. I think that came out on Vita. I mean, PSP.
No, it came out on Dreamcast.
Oh yeah. Oh no, yeah, you're right. It did.
Yeah, it stopped after 2. That was it. And I heard it they never released another one because Sega and Capcom had like a licensing clause together. So that's why people have never seen a Power Stone 3.
Yeah,
Would love to see one.
those are my favorite.
Did you all want to before I continue with a couple more questions for you all, did you all want to put a bookend on the history of PlayStation stealing from Sega?
I think we did a really good job of just basically laying it out. I mean, after PlayStation came out and PlayStation 2 came out, Sony pretty much knew that Sega was going down, and this was where I was trying to go with Okawa and the Okawa history. Is that Okawa basically took over for Nakayama in Japan, and that was it was a conflict of interest because Okawa was basically the CEO of the investment company that invested in Sega, and Nakayama left the company, and Okawa took over Nakayama's position as CEO. And when he did that, it kind of messed the company up real bad. And what did Nakayama do? Nakayama hired a former Sony executive, Bernie Stoller, to run Sega. And basically, in my opinion, that's how Sony knew for PS2 that Sega was going down, was because Bernie Stoller basically was in there. I'm not claiming he did anything illegal, but
Like a double agent.
maybe somebody around him was, and we didn't know, or maybe he was doing it and we don't know. But from my opinion, that's what happened. And basically after PS2, Sony didn't really have anything to do with Sega after that. I mean, Sega did have a lot of games on PS2, but that was because of the way Microsoft treated them, because initially Microsoft and Sega were basically working together on Xbox in order to put some of their games on. But some of the Xbox people had some kind of axe to grind against Sega for some reason, and they decided to tell Sega, no, we're not going to put your Dreamcast games on our system. Your Dreamcast games that are online are they're too low band or whatever it is, which is BS, because Ethernet can handle the regular dial-up modem games just fine. They just didn't want to work with them. But Sega took all their games basically and put them on PS2 at that point. But after that, it kind of really disgusted me. So now there really isn't anything else to say about Sony stealing from Sega after that, because basically after that, they basically destroyed Sega from the inside out, and Okawa was part of that as well. So, yeah.
Which is more disgusting to you, seeing Sega on PlayStation or seeing Sega on Nintendo?
Both of them are. They're both equally disgusting.
No, you got to pick one.
No. They're both equally disgusting because they're disgusting in two different ways. One is Sony's disgusting because of how they're backstabbing and the way they destroyed Sega, and Nintendo's disgusting because they're natural rivals, and they should never be on each other's systems whatsoever, ever.
Nintendo would never do that. Nintendo will get rid of their CEO before they put Mario on another console. Like, you'll never see Mario.
Yeah, I mean they did do Android, but that's a different beast.
That's different though. But
sorry about that.
No, go ahead.
Now, what Valentine is elaborating is that Sega's parent company at the time was CSK Holdings. They were an offshoot of Gulf Western, and Gulf Western used to own Paramount. Now, their CSK's owner was Isa Okawa. He brought out Sega in 1983, right when they were bringing out the SG-1000, because Sega put out the SG-1000 in Japan and Asia on their own, because Gulf Western kept getting cold feet and would not finance it or anything like that. Now we skip ahead to 2000. In 2000, after the successful launch of Dreamcast International, Hayao Nakayama left. He left Sega because he had a guy named Soichiro Hiromajimi run their Sega West division, and he had overseen a lot of it. So the guys before that, the other guy, that Nakayama known, David Rose and Martin Bromberg, they had left Sega at 96. Okawa was there all the way up till he got the chairman title with Sega. He came in right after Nakayama left. He had already been selling patent secretly to Sony. I don't know if you ever heard of the Sony Pocket Station.
Mm-mm.
You can Google it, but notice how similar it is to the Dreamcast VMU. I know you've heard of iToy. Notice how iToy is similar to Dream Eye, which was a camera only released in Japan for the Dreamcast, which was way out before iToy. Okawa was selling patents from Sega to Sony. That's what he was doing. Okawa's idea was that he wanted not only Sega to go software, he wanted Sega to abandon video games.
Hold on, my bad. What did you say it was called?
Dream Eye or Pocket Station, Sony Pocket Station. It's a real thing, and they was gonna come out in around 2000 for the PS1, and they were gonna do one for the PS2.
Am I looking at the right thing?
Just just Google Sony
Oh,
Pockets.
sorry, it's not showing the screen. Hold on, share this tab. My bad. Here we go. Share this tab.
Just to type in Sony Pocket Station.
Is it showing it on you all?
Yeah. Notice that. Notice how almost identical it is to VMUs for the Dreamcast.
Yeah, I remember those.
Yeah, the little pocket memory cards on Dreamcast. Yeah. They had the monochrome display. They had really short battery life and made a beeping sound every time you turn your Dreamcast on because the battery life was so weak.
Yeah, I don't think anything other than this and the mini webcam that he was talking that Sega Renaissance was talking about that Sony took too much from Sega. I mean, there really wasn't much after Dreamcast went away. So there really isn't much else that they did, and I don't think there's any more history that we need to say about that.
That's kind of it. I mean, the only thing I say is that Cal was the only one that made Dreamcast go away. When he came in, everybody, even his own folks at CSK, told him it would cause a massive deficit if you do this. Don't pull the plug. He said, I'm going to do it anyway. He tried shopping Sega's IPs to so many other companies. He didn't want Sega to do video games anymore. He wanted to move them away from video games for good. There were literally ideas on building like ridiculous things in scientific research. And there was even a ridiculous concept for a little bit of a urinal that had a score bar on it or something like that. I'm not joking. And that's what he was planning for Sega when he took over. So what happened is that Okawa had shut everything down. He went around trying to sell off their IPs. He went to Sony and tried to sell Sonic to them. He went to Acclaim and sold a lot of arcade IPs off to them. He went to THQ and he tried to sell other IPs to them. He literally took all of Sega's IPs. And the funny, ironic thing is that the publishers that he sold their IPs to, they're gone. None of them exist anymore. Wow. THQ is long gone. Acclaim is long gone. H-Tech is long gone as well. So that's why if you look at a lot of games that are the Sega titles on PS2, that's why they're mostly published by other people. Because that was Okawa trying to sell them off. The other last part about it regarding Okawa's, right after his death, it was discovered that he was like Ken Lay, the Japanese Ken Lay. He was actually stealing from investors.
Wow.
Yeah, he was stealing. So they had to take CSK and delist them off the Japanese stock exchange. And that's when Sammy went on ahead and brought the company. Basically, Hajime Satomi came in and the Nikkei had delisted CSK. And Sega was not insolvent, or rather, their name had just changed to Sega Corporation. So he had the opportunity to buy them, but he brought their debt too. Came from CSK, and he had to pay that off. And he used his company, Sammy, to pay that off. So, like I said, so from there, it kind of ends with the PlayStation and Sega and whatnot. And from there, because when Sega goes and transitions and all that with Sammy, there's other things that were going on. I mean, they were even trying to plan a 7th-gen console. They really were. And they were trying to plan a new revised Dreamcast. Before Ocala, before he pulled the plug, they were working on that. They had plans for a DVD drive. They had plans to improve the GPU. They had a lot of plans. And they had plans on, just like what Valentine's Day. You could have had a remote like Wii that Midway was working on. Midway's designer actually sued Nintendo in 2008 for that design.
Oh, yeah, I heard about that.
Yep. It was his design. It was designed for Dreamcast originally.
So you have more questions for us about other things, or?
Yeah. So, how would you all say that Nintendo fans are different than Sega fans?
Do you want me to go first, or Sega Renaissance, or?
It doesn't matter.
Okay. What do you say? Do you want to go first this time, Sega Renaissance?
I'll go first. Well, I would look at it this way. A lot of the old Nintendo fans from the 80s and 90s.
And that's what I'm specifically talking about. We're not talking about, the Switch era. I'm talking about you've been here from the beginning.
Yeah.
Sorry, younger people, but you don't get to be a part of this conversation.
Yes. The ones in the beginning, a lot of them were, you had it split. Most of them were friendly to Sega. A lot of them, because those that didn't know about the Master System found out about Master System later.
Yeah.
But when the Genesis was around, their only grievance, they didn't like you saying that the RPGs in the Super Nintendo were weaker than those of the Genesis. But they would always kind of say, okay, both are great. I love both. They're cool. Both of them are really awesome. But the Genesis has a lot more action games. The Super Nintendo has RPGs and adventure games. I never found anyone in my day that only owned one. I knew many that owned both.
Yeah.
And half of them that owned both were early adopters like me to the Super Nintendo. And had gotten Super Nintendo back when it came out, but didn't get Genesis until like after Sonic 2 came out. That's when they got the Genesis. So I would say that, and when you get to N64, a lot of them were like patiently, like, we know that you just got to wait for games to come out. But a lot of them really kind of just stuck with the 80 Super NES and the Sega Channel until both of them bit the dust in 1997. Those that own Saturn, they got Saturn because it was a bargain bin price, because they had not been doing that well in America.
Another thing, pardon me, as you all mentioned, Sega did it first earlier. Sega Channel, that was revolutionary. Like, we look at like Nintendo Switch Online and all of these, game streaming service now, but they were doing that in the 90s. I still remember going over to my friend across the street's house, Sean, and him having Sega Channel, and that was the coolest thing. That was one of the coolest things I've ever seen. And Sega Channel, I feel like, was one of the coolest things I remember from my childhood video game experience.
Yeah, Sega
it's something
Channel,
that nobody ever talks about.
Yeah, because Sega Channel was way before that and way before Steam. Sega Channel was a service that ran on cable. It ran through a cable server. So that's even more, 1994, 95, we're talking when the internet was just being introduced, that you got your Sega Channel, all of the games running on a cable server.
Yeah.
On cable. The thing is that America Online, they had that idea in 83. But their thing was really more kind of basic, where you just rent one Atari game and you order through your phone line. But the thing is that people don't realize that Sega was already having online gaming in Japan in 1989 and 90.
Wow.
It's called Mega Drive Modem. This is when Usenet is way before the internet. So think about it, in Japan, lucky Japanese players got to play games online on the Mega Drive in Japan at the beginning of the 1990s. before anybody knew what that was. Sega was always ahead of their time. The Dreamcast had a browser. The Sega Saturn had a cartridge attachment that allowed you to get on the internet and allows you to use a browser called the Saturn Netlink. The Sega CD introduced the idea of storing game memory on a separate cartridge. So Sega was always ahead of everybody. Everyone just took their ideas and they didn't improve it. They just made it. They kind of made it from their own. They implemented their own way. You know, they did it like that because the Xbox, of course, a lot of the original Xbox has elements of Dreamcast because the engineers, Sega America, had worked with Microsoft. That's why the original Xbox is very Dreamcast-like, and has very, everything very, very much like the Dreamcast.
Yeah, I never even thought about that. Valentine, what about you though? What's the difference between Sega fans and Nintendo fans? Besides Sega fans were a lot of black.
So old school, since you qualified, not new people. People back then, I think back then, there's two things you could really look at between Nintendo fans and Sega fans back then. One was what was the console about and what it meant to you, and the other one was about like more about the type of games that were on there. So like for instance, I was a Sega fan and I was about the attitude. Sonic was attitude, right? Sonic was the attitude. And then from my perspective, if you were playing Nintendo, you were the kiddie side, right? Like you were the family side. Sonic was for the edgy teen side. And, in the early 90s, that's what it was all about, man. Early 90s was about edgy teen stuff. It wasn't about the whole family stuff, right? But that's kind of the difference I saw between the two.
I just thought about something. And did you guys watch Boy Meets World?
I've seen it a few times.
Look, this is the perfect comparison. Corey Matthews is Nintendo and Sean Hunter is Sega.
Yeah, I could see that. Yeah,
I just thought about that. Oh my gosh.
The yin and the yang, and that's why I believe that Sega should not be making games for Nintendo platform. They should be competing. That there's a yin and a yang. Nintendo needs Sega, and Sega needs Nintendo.
And that was
but not together.
Yeah,
that was
as
actually going to be
as competitors.
One of my next. It's like Batman and Joker need each other.
Yes.
Well, come on now.
Like, I mean, they do.
No, but Sega ain't Joker. Come on now.
Yeah. Man, Brainiac. Nintendo's Brainiac and Sega Superman. Kal-El.
That actually was going to be one of my next questions is, could you see Sega making a comeback? Hardware wise.
Well, gee, how do I explain this in a way that doesn't? Okay. I guess I'll just answer that simply, and then I could add on to it if you want. But my simple answer is, yeah, I think they could. I really do. I think they could come back if they had the right plan, the right marketing, the right hardware, the right software, and they had a pair of cojones on them, that they could come back and say, hey, we're here. We're the best in the business. That's why everybody's scared of where we're going next. I mean, come on, think about it. When Sega puts a game out on Steam, everybody loses their mind.
Yeah.
I mean, a good game. I don't mean like some stupid hospital game or some stupid, stupid
like
tactics game or whatever they put out there, some stupid game like that. But when they put out a legit game, and as much as I don't like them, when they release Yakuza games, people pay attention to that stuff, and where they put them, people pay attention to that stuff. But if Sega came out full force and said, this is our full library, we're putting it out on this system, it's our hardware, it's no one else's, and we don't give a two toss of coins who or what anyone else thinks of. This is what we're doing because we've got the goods. And if you want to play, come play with us. And if they did that, put it out there, pulled a Sony and dropped the price, like, Nintendo's going for $400 now, $500. If Sega came out with the same price as Nintendo Switch, Sega would rule the roost right now. That's my opinion. That's my short. That's my short side of what that opinion is.
All right. Go
I'll
ahead.
go and say it kind of like this. I'll make a few points. The first point is, I'll say straight up for it. Yes, they could come back. The first point about it is that Sega has the largest IP library in industry. There's I can't understand how many IPs they have. There's IPs that people don't even remember that they still have. Like there's Rise of Nightmares, Alpha Protocol, Bayonetta. Those are some of the more recent ones. Warhammer. There is a lot of IPs, and they don't need to be put on multi-platforms because all of these owners, they don't think the same way. Sega's ecosystem has always been arcades, our home conversion consumer consoles that are counterparts of the arcade machines, and then you go to PC, and now you have mobile in between. Sega has the talent. They have the talent. They have the engineering talent. They have the development talent. But they need their ability to breathe on their own, to be able to use their own platform to be able to implement their ecosystem. Giving them the time to work with hardware they're familiar with. They can't make a primo PlayStation 5 game because it's not their hardware. They don't know. They don't really understand. All they're getting is just source codes, but they're not getting the full tools to make great games because they don't do that no more. Sega could easily, if you gave them hardware, that's kind of what I'm trying to do on my end in regards to before they get their big first party system. Give them hardware that they can become familiar with. Give them HDKs that allow them to learn the trade secrets, the point of entry. And Sega can do wonderful things with hardware. Sega did tremendously wonderful things with Dreamcast hardware. If you watch with the Saturn, if you watch the Shenmue Saturn demos, what they were working on Saturn, it blows people's minds. Yeah. Because I'm like, I can't believe this. PlayStation 1 looks nothing like this. It's not even capable of this. This is outstanding. So think about that. If Sega just said to themselves, yeah, we know I remember, but let's come up with a roadmap. Let's come up with a plan. Let's approach the market differently. And just let them understand that so much time has passed that any sort of mistakes or mishaps they made back then, they have another chance. They have a second chance. Because Mattel isn't around anymore. Atari is long gone, and what's left is their name. And and you had everybody else. EDC, they left video gaming in the late 90s. You don't really have all that no more. So we just have these big three, but it's starting to chafe on this industry. Why not have that one come out of retirement?
Yeah, it needs more competitors, that's for sure.
And be more competitive. And like I said, work on building capital and know that things are different now. And what you can do now, right now, video gamers want to have dictation over their games. And no one is really giving them that option anymore. Yeah. No one owns their games anymore. Everything is all digital. Everything is all DRM. You got to be arbitrarily restricted from playing your game. You can't, with PS5, you put in those discs. It's not
just
offline. Go on a server just to play it.
Yeah, it's just a skeleton.
Yeah. It's so no one owns their games anymore. Yeah. What happened to the days of you owning it and collecting it and preserving it? And that's part of what my project is about, and that's part of what his project is about. So yes, Sega, if Sega could just not look at the look at the trends and stop looking at what's typical, they could completely dominate and have a total renaissance, which is why I use that name.
So if you all are interested another time, if you do want to let everybody know what you're working on if that's open for discussion. But
Oh,
before
sure.
we wrap up this conversation, I want to do just some quick fire questions for you guys. All right, so how we want to do this? We want to do back and forth. I can't. All right, we're gonna do back and forth. Okay.
Okay.
All right.
All right. So, Valentine, you can start. All right, hold up. So, some rapid fire. Okay, and don't put a lot of thought into it. All right. All right, but all right. Saturn or Dreamcast?
Dreamcast.
All right. Renaissance, Sonic, Shadow, Knuckles, or Tails?
Tails.
All right. Valentine. Well, I think I know the answer for this for you, but Game Gear or Nomad? You're gonna say Nomad.
No, Game Gear.
Oh, really? Okay. I'm getting this off. All right. um, let's see. Renaissance, best Sega franchise of all time, not including Sonic.
I would say. Oh no, nothing. Oh, sure. It's easy. Afterburner.
Okay. All right. And Valentine, I'll actually ask you all both this, but you have to give me short answers. All right.
Okay.
What's your most painful moment as a Sega fan?
The day
Short
they
answers.
the day they canceled the Sega Dreamcast and told everybody that it was just as good to play Sega games on anything else, and that it was to play it on Dreamcast or Sega hardware. That's my most painful day.
What about you?
The day that Okawa announced that they were going multi-platform, February 1st, 2001. I just didn't want to accept it. I just couldn't. And it was devastating, and it was utter despondence.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate having you all on. Thank you very much. I know it took a while for us to all finally get together. So I appreciate you all's patience with that. And thank you once again, Valentine, for coming back on, despite us having the initial audio issues. I appreciate you guys. And if is there anything that you want to leave everybody with when it comes to Sega?
Thank you very much for having me on. I appreciate it, and hopefully this time everything came out well.
We'll see.
Yeah, I hope so. I tried to use my quote unquote good mic. I think what people should really remember with Sega is that yeah, they're a publisher. Yeah, they have a certain amount of money that they're spending and stuff right now, but they could be so much better. They could literally be the beginning of a new video game market if they just put everything, like they don't have to put everything on the line, but if they just put everything they've got behind it and tried to make at least something, even just a handheld, I think they would see benefits to having Sonic on his own home console like Mario does for his own home console. And remember guys, just hold on to your games, don't let anybody take them from you, and this is yours to lose, so keep playing.
Oh, I was sorry. I do appreciate everything. We definitely should do this again. We definitely should be talking more about where this industry needs to go, because it has been going in the wrong direction for the past several years.
Yeah.
And that's certain. It needs to go in a new direction. We do need to put an end to a lot of anti-gaming and anti-consumer practices. Like I think microtransactions is an awful idea. I think loot crates are even worse. But I would say in regards to Sega, there's a reason why they're the only one left. There's a reason why Coleco's long gone, why Atari's long gone, why Mattel is long gone, why EC is long gone. The reason why is because there is still their destiny to come back, to return, but learn from their past and do things differently. And and be wiser, be a lot wiser in managing things, and wiser making decisions, and and remembering that they are the video game company with heart and soul and passion. You don't see that from Sony, and you never will. With Nintendo, everything is on a standard. everything is kind of like it's hard to kind of explain kind of because Nintendo lives by a standard and they live by one principle and they follow that and that alone and they always going to do that. But you know, with Sega again, Sega could make the biggest renaissance return ever. They could if they just gave it a chance and stop being afraid of their past and thinking that people will hold them to the same standards and they were held to back in the 90s, you know, 3 decades back. And know that all the people that were there that were responsible for them making bad decisions aren't even around anymore. Okawa is long dead and Stoller died, you know, years back.
I agree. It is about to cut off, but I didn't want you to. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you very much.
It seemed like still going. But yeah, I didn't want it to cut you off mid sentence. But yeah, man. I love Sega. I love Sega. I love Nintendo. Sega. It's something about Sega is a vibe. You know what I'm saying? I don't even like the word vibe, but I don't have another word to describe it. You know, when you play Sega, it just puts you in a whole different like headspace. When you play other like Nintendo or something, it just feels like you're playing a video game. You know what I mean? Not to knock it, but it's like Sega. I don't know. They did a great job with their branding. That is for sure.
Yep.
They did a great job. But yo, I appreciate having you guys on. Thank you all so much for stopping through.
It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you for having us. And, you know, hopefully this will be the beginning of you having a lot more other people on here other than us two knuckleheads on here. But yeah, it was an honor to be here and talk to you about it and lay some history and some stories, you know, and give some texture to what video gaming means to, you know, to people, you know, instead of just consumerism, you know. So yeah, I appreciate it. I can't speak for Sega Renaissance, but I definitely appreciate you letting me on here and just ramble on. So thank you very much.
Thank you guys. Appreciate you. And make sure that you all like and subscribe. You know what I'm saying? I am trying to get monetized. You feel me? So in order to get monetized, I need people to subscribe. And thank you guys for tuning in. If you're interested in you know, sharing your story when it comes to games, or you guys completely disagree with Valentine and Renaissance, and you are very firm in your beliefs with PlayStation or Nintendo, you know, let me know and we can do a video and then it can completely contradict this one. And then we can get them all in a room in a cage match and they can all battle it out. You know what I'm saying? All right. Love you guys. God bless and salutations to the nations. Peace.
Angel Knot.